Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Kamish Orr. Today we're going to take a look at Baseball Hitting Stats 101. If you've ever taken a look at Baseball Reference, like we see Aaron Judge's page here, and you scroll down to the standard batting stats, a lot of these are probably pretty easy to figure out. But I thought I would cover, there are 23 baseball stats that we'll be covering today. And I say 101 because we're not going to get into the advanced stats that are down below here. That will be saved for a future video. But we're going to cover the basic stats up here. If you are an expert at baseball, you probably don't need this video. However, if you are brand new to the game and just want to know how some of the stats are determined, you've come to the right place because we're going to cover it. Or if you are, you know a little bit about baseball, but maybe not some of the intricacies of what OPS means or OPS plus, how it's determined, why it's important, that kind of thing, then keep watching and you will learn that as well. And what I'm going to do for demonstration purposes today, I'm going to use Aaron Judge here just as a demonstration of the stats in question on a player's page, just so you can kind of see how the stats are laid out on a page. And then we're going to take a look at the 2023 leaders, if you will. But as I go through each stat, I'm going to tell you kind of what the average is for the different stats. So you kind of get a feel for what is good in a particular category and what is exceptional in a particular category. And keep in mind that this will change year to year and season to season, decade to decade. This particular season is the 2023 season. I chose that because it's the last full season, of course, that we have stats for. But I think this will also help you judging current stats for this year or even recent past seasons as well. If you go back too far, though, keep in mind that there are fluctuations in some of these stats, averages and that kind of thing. So the averages I detailed today are going to be the 2023 season averages. So, very first thing, right off the bat, we're not going to talk about WAR right now. And if you notice the Aaron Judge's page, it doesn't list that anyway. The first real stat is games, and that's just the number of games they appear in. Okay? But the very next stat, and the one that is very important to determining some of these percentages later on, is plate appearances, PA. It's abbreviated PA. Plate appearances. And what that represents is each completed turn batting. So that's every result between the pitcher and the batter. What it doesn't include would be things like if there's a wild pitch, if there's a pass ball, if there's a game-winning balk. If one of those ended the game, then the batter would not get a plate appearance, obviously, because there was no result between the pitcher and the batter. However, every result between the pitcher and batter does count as a plate appearance. Generally speaking, in order to qualify for batting titles and such, you need 3.1 plate appearances per team game. 3.1 plate appearances per team game. So a 162 game season, you would need 502 plate appearances to qualify for batting average titles and that kind of thing. And we'll talk about the difference between counting stats and rate stats in a little bit. But just so you can kind of get an idea, it's 502. It's actually 502.2 is the average number of plate appearances, the number of plate appearances you would need to qualify for those results. And as we see here, the leaders in this category usually have over 700 plate appearances. The top 10 we see, top 11 we see are all above 700 plate appearances. Usually this is guys at the top of the batting order, so guys at the top of the batting order tend to come up to bat a lot. Of course, also determined by how many games they played, whether they were injured and that kind of thing, and that's why they have the 3.1 per team game qualifier, because if you didn't, you could have a guy play 2 games and go 4 for 4, 2 for 2 in each game, let's say, and bat 1,000, and he would win the batting title, right? But they want the players to have enough playing time so that some of those fluky things kind of average out, if you will. So that's plate appearances. The next step in the screen here is at bats. And an at bat and a plate appearance are often confused, but an official at bat comes when a batter reaches base via a fielder's choice, or a base hit, or an error, or when a batter is put out on a non-sacrifice. So things like walks are not included in an at-bat. Hit by pitch isn't included in an at-bat. Catcher's interference is not included in an at-bat. And sacrifice hits and sacrifice flies are not included in at-bats. An at-bat has to be either a fielder's choice, a hit, or reached on error, because in cases of errors, they assume the player would have been out otherwise. And that's why at-bats are lower than plate appearances, because you have the walks that aren't counted in, and hit by pitch and some of those other things are not factored in. And so the average number of at-bats in 2023 was 449. 449. But as you can see, the league leaders usually have around over 600, well over 600. Occasionally, you'll see players get 700. Occasionally, but generally speaking, over 600 at-bats is where you will see the league leaders. Runs is the next thing. R, runs. And very simply, that's how many times that particular player crossed home plate to score a run for their team. It doesn't matter how they crossed home plate. As long as they crossed home plate and a run was scored for the team by them, then it counts as a run for them. If they were a pinch runner, it counts for them. Regardless of the reason they came home and scored, it counts as a run. And the average in 2023 was 61. However, kind of what you look for is 100 in some of these categories. Like 100 runs would be pretty good. Be very good to have 100 or more runs. We can see last year that Acuna Jr. had 149 to lead his league, the National League, and the American League leader had 122. So anything above 100 is pretty good, because of course, if you're scoring runs, your team is more likely to win the more runs the team scores. Let's go on to hits. H. So a hit occurs when a batter makes contact with a baseball into fair territory and reaches base other than errors and fielder's choices. What's an error? That means the ball is hit to a fielder and the fielder should have made the play, but he bobbles it or drops it or whatever, allowing the batter to reach base. That's an error. A fielder's choice means that the fielder was trying to put out another runner, and therefore he could have put out the batter if he had tried to put out the batter, but he made a choice. The fielder made a choice to put out or attempt to put out another runner. And so those don't count as hits for the batter, because he would have been put out had that fielder's choice not occurred. Of course, there are 4 types of hits in baseball: singles, doubles, triples, and home runs. And all 4 are equal when considering batting average. They all count as just one hit. Now, if a player is thrown out attempting to take an extra base, let's say he hits a single and tries to stretch it into a double and then gets thrown out at second, he still gets the hit. He still gets a single in that case, even if he gets thrown out trying to stretch it into a double or something like that. On average, in 2023, 111, 112 hits, somewhere in that range. But a good total for hitters, as you can see, varies a little bit. An exceptional total for hitters would be 200 or above. 200 or above hits in a season is exceptional. We can see if we go the top 10, 175, 175 or above would put you in the top 10. But 111, 112 is about average in 2023. Again, this varies. It's going to vary a little bit with batting average, with league batting average, stuff like that. But yeah, anything over 200 is very, 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 very exceptional. You can see only a couple of hitters last year had more than 200 hits. And then we get to doubles. Doubles, very simply, are represented by 2B. doubles is when you reach second base without the help of an error or attempt to put out another base runner. So you make contact and you run to second base and you don't get put out. And they didn't try to put out another base runner. So you get a double. And on average, 22 to 23 doubles is about average in 2023. As you can see here, top 10, we go to top 10, even top 20 would get you 36 or more, we get you top 20. There's not much of a difference between top 20 and top 10, just a couple. But the very exceptional players, as you can see here, last year, 59 led the league in the National League, 42 led the league in the American League. So if you get over around 40 or above, that's exceptional for doubles. Doubles are usually hits like down the baselines or in the gaps between fielders, outfielders. Those usually result in doubles, so you need a little bit of speed. Not exceptional speed, but you need a little bit of speed to get doubles. Triples, on the other hand, triples are fairly rare, and that's when you reach third base without the help of an error or attempt to put out another base runner. And the average player only gets about a couple of triples a year on average. Many players don't get any. The league leaders only get 10 or 11, as you see here. If you have 5 or more, I mean, that already puts you in the top 35. So most players aren't hitting maybe any triples. Maybe they'll get a fluke triple here or there. So on average, you're only getting a couple of triples, because what you really need to run 270 feet without getting thrown out is you need something, you either need to be extremely fast on the base paths, or you need to hit the ball and get a good ricochet off of the outfield wall, or something freakish with the ballpark to happen, or maybe a combination of those two things, because just chances are that you're just not going to hit it somewhere where a fielder can't get to the ball and throw it back in before you get to third base. That's why you need exceptional speed if you want to lead or have a lot of triples. Now we get to the home runs, HR. And home run is when you hit a fair ball, much like the others, and you score on the play without being put out or without the benefit of an error. So most cases that happens when you hit the ball over the outfield wall in fair territory. Once you do that, it's a home run, and you can run them around the bases. You don't have to worry about getting thrown out. It scores everybody that was on base. They don't have to worry about getting thrown out. Once in a great while, you'll get an inside the park home run, which is when the ball does not clear the outfield wall, but maybe bounces around. A fielder misplays it a little bit, not enough for an error, but the ball caroms in a weird way off the wall, and you have a fast base runner maybe, and he makes it all the way home before getting thrown out on the play. Then you have an inside the park home run, which are more rare. Now, another type of home run is a grand slam, and that occurs when the bases are loaded and a home run is hit, and it scores all base runners, including the hitter. So the batter gets a run scored on a home run because he's scoring himself, and then he gets and he's scoring everybody in front of him too, and we'll get to that the next thing. But on average, the average player in 2023 only had 16 home runs. I should say this is the average qualifier, right? The average qualifier had 16 home runs. But if we look at the league leaders, anything 40 or above is exceptional. And the all-time leaders have over 70. All-time leaders. But that is extremely rare. It made headlines a couple years ago in 2022 when Aaron Judge had 61. Because that hadn't been done for a while either. As you can see, Matt Olson led the American League with 54 last year, and Ohtani had 44 to lead the American League in 2023. Anything 40 or above is exceptional for home runs. So RBI, runs batted in. That's when you have a plate appearance that results in a run being scored. You drive somebody home, even on an out. So even if you ground out, if a runner makes it home on the play, you get an RBI. You don't get an RBI when the run scores because of an error. So You ground it to short, and the shortstop bobbles it, and the runner on third scores. That's not an RBI because the runner on third would not have scored other than the fact that there was an error on the play. You also don't get an RBI if you ground into a double play. So you ground to short, bases are loaded, let's say. You ground to short, there's no outs, and they turn a short to second base to first base double play for 2 outs, but the runner on third scored on the play. The batter doesn't get an RBI there because I guess it's a penalty for grounding into a double play. So no RBI in that case. But, likewise, if you're up and there's a wild pitch that scores a run or a pass ball that scores a run, that doesn't count as a plate appearance for you because you're still at bat. It has to be a plate appearance of yours that results in the run being scored. And on average, there's 50. The average player had 59 RBI in 2023. But again, this is one of those categories like runs where it's like 100 or above is pretty good. You can see here you'd have to be the top 18 players last year. 100 or more RBI would put you at a top 18 player. The leaders, you can see here, 139 in the National League and 112 in the American League. So most of the time, players aren't getting that much more than 100 RBI. You have to be batting with guys that get on base in front of you a lot in order for that to happen, and you have to be a pretty good hitter for that to happen. There's a combination of those things, and then there's just sheer luck sometimes to lead you to get a lot of RBI. Next up, we have SB, stolen bases. And that's when a base runner takes a base he's not entitled to. So, because he steals the base, right? Now, a couple of little quirky things that must be during an attempt to steal. So, if you're on first base, you're making no attempt to steal, and there is a pass ball or a wild pitch, meaning a ball got by the catcher, and you go to second on that play, you don't get a stolen base there. You weren't attempting to steal. Unless you were actually attempting to steal when that happened. And then the scorer is like, yeah, he would have stolen the base otherwise, except for the fact that there was a ball that got by the catcher. You might get a stolen base then. But for the most part, it's got to be when you're attempting to steal and you make it to second or third or home without getting put out. You also don't get stolen base if there's an error. So if there's a throw and the fielder drops the ball as you're sliding in and you're safe, you don't get the stolen base. Unless, again, in the scorer's judgment, you would have made it otherwise. Likewise, if there's a double steal, meaning maybe there's runners on first and second and both runners try to steal, and they throw out the trail runner, let's say, you don't get a stolen base of third if the other runner's thrown out. Or you don't get a stolen base of second if the other runner's thrown out. Because it's kind of like a fielder's choice. The catcher had a choice to make, and he threw at the other guy instead of you. The last case where you don't get a stolen base is if the defense just gives you the base. Usually this happens like late in the game when it's maybe a blowout or that runner doesn't really matter. And rather than focusing on that base runner that doesn't matter, the defense doesn't even try to hold them to the base. There's no throw made. They just let the runner take the next base. And that's called defensive indifference. So the defensive indifference, player just advances and no attempt is made to try to throw him out. And you'll see that again late in some games where they just let the runner take the base because it's not important. And he will not get a stolen base in those cases. Now, on average, the average player only gets about 9 or 10 stolen bases in a season. But of course, the very fast runners get way more than that. As you can see last year, Acuna Jr. Led the National League with 73, and Reese led Oakland with 67. He led the American League with 67. Now, stolen bases have gone up a little bit because the bases are actually larger, meaning there's less distance between bases now. And with the pitch clock and that kind of thing, that limits how many times a pitcher can throw over to first base or second base to try to get the runner out. So stolen bases subsequently have gone up in the last since last season. So that's just something to keep in mind. Prior to that, they had been on a long decline, and not very many teams attempted it. Now, in earlier eras, that was not the case, and there were a lot more stolen bases. But you'll see that they've started to go up again in recent years. Now, caught stealing is what happens when you attempted to steal a base, but you're tagged out before reaching the base. Then you get a caught stealing. Now, it doesn't count if you are diving back to first, like the pitcher wheels around and throws to first, and you dive back and get tagged out. That is a pickoff. That is not a caught stealing. Caught stealing only happens when you attempt to steal the next base and you're thrown out. Now, the average player has only 2 or 3 caught stealings a year. Keep in mind, some players make no attempt to steal at all, so they're going to have no stolen bases, or maybe they'll get a freak stolen base because of weird circumstances. But a lot of players won't attempt it all, so they won't get any caught stealing because they won't attempt it. But on average, 2 or 3 is about average in 2023 for caught stealings. Again, more caught stealing for the faster players because they're taking a lot more chances. They're attempting to steal a lot more often. So that's why you're going to have higher numbers with the higher steal chances here. You're not going to have slow players make enough attempts to get caught that often. All right, next up we have walks. BB, base on balls, is what BB stands for. And it's walks. And that's when you get 4 pitches thrown to you out of the strike zone and you don't swing at any of them during a single plate appearance. And therefore you are awarded first base for free. It's a base on balls because there are 4 balls that were thrown and you're awarded a base on those balls. And you get to walk to first. And on average, there were 43 of those in 2023. But the leaders had, exceptional walk totals would be 100 or more. That'd be pretty exceptional. But, the top 20 have more than 75 in a season. And that's somebody who has a good eye that can tell when a ball is going to be in the strike zone or out of the strike zone. And they're not somebody that swings at, tries to make contact a lot. So they are patient enough to watch those pitches go by and take first base rather than trying to swing at everything. Next, you have SO, or strikeouts, also known as Ks, just the letter K. And that happens when you swing or look at 3 pitches in the strike zone during a plate appearance. 3rd strike, you are out. Now, a foul ball counts as a strike, except it doesn't count as the 3rd strike. So if you foul something off on the 3rd strike, you're not out yet. It can't be that final strike of the at-bat. Now, a foul tip, meaning you make contact but the catcher catches it, is considered a 3rd strike. So that's if you just nick the ball as it's going by and the catcher holds on to it. That's a strikeout because you made contact and the catcher put you out, basically. Now, there is a little bit of a quirky thing here, and that happens when the ball gets by the catcher on the 3rd strike. And it is a 3rd strike, meaning usually when the player swings and misses on a pitch that's outside of the strike zone. He swings and misses, which means it's a strike because he doesn't make contact. And which I should have said earlier, it's not just balls in the strike zone. It can be balls out of the strike zone if you swing and miss. That's a strike also. But in any case, you don't make contact. The pitcher gets by the catcher, and first base is open. There's nobody on first base, or there are 2 outs. In those cases, the batter can try to attempt to run to first before being thrown out. Regardless of if he makes it to first or not safely, it's still a strikeout. He still gets a strikeout even if the ball gets by the catcher and he reaches first base safely. Still a strikeout. So that's just one of those quirky things. You'll see it happen once in a while, but not very often. And the average number of strikeouts was 114. But you can see here that some players have more than 200 in a season because they are swinging at everything. Well, not everything, because Schwarber did walk a lot too. He had over 100 walks as well. but his batting average is 197. So he was also swinging and missing a lot. Top 20 or 165 or more. So mid 100s is pretty bad, generally speaking. There isn't really any penalty other than the fact that you're out, and there's no chance of moving runners forward because you swung and missed or you let the third strike go by. All right, now before we get into the rate stats, we'll call them, let's take a look at way over here, TB, total bases. Total bases. Total bases is the number of bases you gain through your hits. So you get 1 base for a single, 2 for a double, 3 for a triple, and 4 for a home run. It's the total number of bases you gained through your hits. Advancing on the base paths doesn't count. So if you're on first and because you got a single and you advance to second for whatever reason, you still only get 1 total base. It's only bases resulting from your hits. And on average, in 2023, the average was 186. But, as we can see here, exceptional players can get 300 or more. And really exceptional players can get closer to 400. 383, that is exceptional. Way exceptional. Over 300 is exceptional. 383 is really exceptional. And we'll come back to that when we talk about rate stats here in a moment. Next to that, GIDP, that's how many double plays you grounded into. And as you see here, first tracked in 1933, that's when a hitter, hits a ground ball, and that results in multiple outs on the bases. So usually there's a runner on first, you hit a ground ball to the shortstop flips to second base to get that force runner, and he throws to first for a second out. You get a grounded into double play in those cases. The average player grounds into a 9 or 10 a year. If you're really bad, you're grounding into 20 or more. And usually it's slow runners because they can't make it to first base by the time that play is completed. So it's generally speaking, it's slower base runners that ground into double plays. It could be somebody that grounds out a lot, hits a lot of ground balls, because then their chances are just higher. But it's also tends to be slower runners because they can't get to first base by the time that play is made. Just next to that, we have hit by pitch. Hit by pitch. And hit by pitch is when a pitched ball hits you and you don't swing at it. Even includes when it hits part of the uniform. So if it hits a shin guard, if it hits your shirt sleeve sometimes, it doesn't have to hit your flesh in order to be a hit by pitch. And then you're awarded first base automatically. Now, this is superseded by strikes. If you are leaning into the strike zone and the ump thinks a pitch would have been a strike, it's a strike. It nullifies that hit by pitch. Likewise, if you swing and miss and the ball hits you, it's a strike. It's not a hit by pitch. But all other cases, generally speaking, are hit by pitch. And the average player gets about 6 a year. And you can see that some players are getting hit a lot more than that. And that's usually because they crowd the plate. So that because of their batting stance, they maybe are leaning closer to the plate. Or they stand closer to the plate. So they're just more likely that on an inside pitch, they're going to get hit by that pitch. So you can kind of see that. Sacrifice. We're scrolling over here a little bit. SH is sacrifice hit or sacrifice bunt, whichever one you want to call it. And that's when you attempt to advance any runners by laying down a bunt. Bunting means you're not swinging at the pitch, you're putting the bat just to kind of make contact and hopefully dribble it in front of home plate to allow the runner to get to second, let's say. You're sacrificing yourself. You're giving up an out in order to move that runner closer to scoring. Because generally speaking, if you bunt, you're going to get thrown out at first most of the time. But by doing so, you're going to allow that runner on first maybe to go to second. And that gives him a lot higher chance of scoring than if he was on first. Now, if you bunt with a runner on third, it's a squeeze play because you're trying to bunt and get that runner on third to score. It's still recorded as a sacrifice if it's successful. By the way, this is true even if there is an error on the play. If in the scorer's judgment the runner would have advanced other than because of the error, if he would have advanced otherwise, you still get the sacrifice even if there's an error on the play. Now, again, this is one of those things where many players get 0 sacrifice bunts or sacrifice hits because they just never attempt it. Because most players are good enough hitters that they're not going to be asked to try to sacrifice to move the runners along. But usually some worse hitters, and you can see the top couple here are 191, 184. Some of those are just cases where the manager's telling the player to bunt because his chance of swinging and making contact and that runner on first not advancing are higher in their mind. So on average, only many players maybe only have one, but a lot of players don't have any because they won't ever be asked to do that. Sacrifice flies, much like sacrifice hits, sacrifice flies occur when you hit a fly ball to the outfield, or even in foul territory, if it's caught, that allows a runner to score. So runner on third tags up, meaning he keeps his foot on the base. Once the ball is caught, he runs home and scores. That's a sacrifice fly. They first started tracking it in 1955, 54, 55, and it's a play that's changed a little bit because there was a time when a runner advanced from second to third, it was considered a sacrifice fly, but now the runner has to be on third base and score for it to be a sacrifice fly. And the average player gets 3 or 4 of those a year because, again, a runner has to be on third base for it to happen, and you have to hit a fly ball deep enough that the runner can make it home before getting thrown out. So 3 or 4 is average. The league leaders have, 10 or more is pretty good. And it's not something you necessarily are trying for in most cases. Some cases it may be, especially if it's a winning run, you may just be trying to hit a long fly ball to score that runner. But in most cases, it's just happening because you hit a lot of fly balls, or you're hitting fly balls with the runners on third and they're scoring. Next up, we have IBB. So we have BB, which is base on balls. IBB is intentional base on balls. And that's when you are issued a walk on purpose. The pitcher doesn't want to pitch to you, or the team doesn't want to pitch to you. And so they strategically decide to put you on first base because that's going to do less damage than if you are allowed to hit in those cases. Can also happen late in a game when, let's say, the winning run is on third, and they may load the bases up so that there are more bases that outs can be made at, let's say. That may happen. Starting in 2017, the pitcher no longer had to throw 4 balls for an intentional walk. Prior to that, the pitcher still had to throw 4 balls, and you would see catchers standing up with their arm way out of the strike zone to catch those 4 balls in most cases. But nowadays, the manager can just call it from the dugout, and the balls don't need to be thrown, and the runner can take first base that way. Now, once again, this is something that many players will never get intentionally walked because they just won't. They're not good enough to be scary enough to want to intentionally walk, or the situation in the game never comes up. If any, there may be 1 or 2. You may get 1 or 2 a year. The top hitters are going to get, 10 or more sometimes. 10 or more, or maybe many more. I know Barry Bonds had those years where he got intentionally walked an insane amount of times, more than teams. But nowadays, anything 10 or more is a lot of intentional walks, and it's got to be a pretty fearsome hitter to be there for the pitcher or team to want to do that. All right, there's one more stat that's not on here that you will see if we scroll up here. I think it's here. This is team stats. On the far right, we see LOB, runners left on base, and that's how many runners are left on base at the end of an inning. So if the inning ends and there's runners on first and second, that's 2 for that team. Now, it can be an individual stat also. In those cases, it's how many runners are left on base at the end of your plate appearance. So it could be individual also, but you see it a lot more on teams, the left on base there in the field. All right, now we only have a few left, and they are what are known as rate stats. So far, we've been talking about counting stats. Counting stats because every time this play happens or this certain thing happens, it adds 1 to your total, just like you're counting. Rate stats, on the other hand, there is a ratio involved, a mathematical formula or ratio involved to determine what the stat is. And the first one of those is the most common. It's called batting average. Batting average. It's either BA or you sometimes see AVG. And batting average is the number of hits divided by the number of at-bats, and this is carried out to 3 decimal places. So, the average, by the way, in 2023 overall was 248. And this is a stat that definitely fluctuates season to season and era to era and decade to decade, because it wasn't that long ago when average batting averages were 260 or higher. But last year, 248. Right around 250 tends to be the average. But we can see the leaders hit well over that. In fact, if you hit over 300 nowadays, that's considered exceptional. 300 is, in some eras, would not have been exceptional. It would have been closer to average, and you would have needed to hit a lot higher than that to be exceptional. But in 2023, 300 or more would have got you in the top 10 for batting average. Now, the top batting averages in each league, you can see here, 354 and 330. Those are really exceptional, really exceptional. Anything over 275 is going to put you in the top 30-ish. And again, this is only 2023. Again, if you go back not too long ago, you can find eras where 300 hitters were much more common. But in today's game, anything over 300 is really, really, really good. And that's batting average. It's hits, not hits divided by plate appearances. It's hits divided by at-bats. So somebody who walks a lot is not penalized for walks, because the walks aren't counted in their at-bat totals. All right. Next up, speaking of walks, is on base percentage, OBP. And that's basically just a ratio of how often a player or batter reaches base. So it takes hits plus walks plus hit by pitches, the 3 main ways you're going to reach base, and divides that by at-bats, like we just talked about, plus the walks and hit by pitches, plus sacrifice flies. Because again, remember, sacrifice flies were not considered an at-bat. They were not considered an at-bat. So sacrifice flies don't hurt your batting average because they're not considered an at-bat, but they do hurt your on-base percentage because you did not reach base during that particular plate appearance. Now, sacrifice hits are not included in this formula at all because the thought process is they're rarely a hitter's decision to make. Usually, a sacrifice hit is called by the manager, and the hitter doesn't really have a choice in the matter. So they're not penalized for sacrifice hits, if you will, in this formula. Sacrifice hits are just removed from the equation entirely. 320 is the average on-base percentage in 2023, but 400 or above is really good. Really, really good. That gets you top 7. Even the top players, the top couple players, 416 or 412 are the top players. Now, in eras past, you would have seen players with higher on-base percentages than that even. But in today's game, anything over 400 is exceptional because the average is only 320. Next up, we have Slugging percentage, and this is, we're into the last three here. Slugging, SLG is slugging percentage. And that's basically the ratio of total bases. Remember, that's 1 for a single, 2 for a double, 3 for a triple, 4 for a home run. Total bases divided by at-bats. It measures, it does a good job of measuring power that doesn't just consider home runs. A lot of times people look at home runs as the main way of measuring power. This gives you credit for those doubles too, because there are a lot of players that hit a lot of doubles too, and they should get some credit for that. And so this factors that in too. And in 2023, the average slugging percentage was 414. 414. But anything really above 500 would put you in the top 20. And the very, very tip-top players are getting over 600 slugging percentage, which is amazingly good. Amazingly good. Okay? Amazingly good is over 600 slugging. Next, we have OPS. And some of these are just ways of trying to measure player value in different ways. Batting average was the OG in that case, because batting average was like, oh, it measures how often you get hits, but it didn't factor in all the times that a player walked. He was patient enough to walk and get on base that way. So on base percentage came around that factored in walks and that kind of thing. And then you had slugging that measured power. You had slugging that measured power. Well, OPS is a combination of those two things. It combines getting on base, that's the on base part of the equation, combined with hitting for power, which is the slugging part of the equation. So OPS is on base plus slugging, OPS. And the average in 2023 was 734, which makes sense because the average on base percentage was 320, the average slugging was 414. But we go to OPS here. You can see top 20 OPS would be 850 or above, would be top 20. And the exceptional players have an OPS over 1. Have an OPS over 1. So usually that's an on-base percentage of 400 or above and a slugging percentage over 600 or above, which are both exceptional, would get you that 1 OPS. Ohtani last year, his OPS leading the American League was 1,066 because his on-base percentage was 412, led the league. His slugging was 654, led the league. Okay? But even if you're looking at past seasons, anything over 1 is top tier. Top tier. And finally, the last thing we're going to take a look at is OPS plus. OPS plus. You're like, that isn't a 3 decimal place number, is it? No, it's not. It is a number that basically takes OPS and compares it to the league average. And so it's a ratio of how much better this player is than league average. Now, it's not just straight OPS based on league average. It actually takes the batter's on base percentage, compares that to the league average on base percentage, adds the batter's slugging percentage compared to the league average slugging percentage, adds those two factors together, and then adjusts for the ballpark that the player plays in. Okay? Adjust for the ballpark, because Coors Field offense is higher, and so this adjusts for that and normalizes some of those players when factoring this total. So of course, the average is 100. 100 is the league average by definition. And if we look at OPS plus here, we can see that anything above 100 is above average, obviously, because 100 is average. Anything over 130 or above gets you top 20. Gets you top 20 because that's 30% better than league average, if you will. Now, Ohtani last year led the American League in OPS plus at 184. 184 is almost twice as good, roughly, as the league average. So what OPS plus does a good job of is it does a good job of helping you compare players. It also does a fairly decent job of being able to compare players across seasons and eras because players are measured based on league averages. You can see the exceptional players are going to have higher OPS plus regardless of what season it is. So it does do a quick and dirty way of measuring players across eras. I say quick and dirty because there are other ways that you can delve in a little bit deeper. But again, these are the 23 what I call basic or 101 batting stats. Batting stats 101. Now OPS and OPS plus, those, I don't know, maybe those are 102 batting stats. Maybe there's a little bit more, but I'd say these are the basic batting stats that you'll see if you look at, again, going back to Aaron Judge's page here. By the way, his 2024 OPS plus so far is 219. Yes, 219. And in 2022 it was 210. So I mean, that's just crazy. But just to kind of give you an idea, these are the stats you'll see if you look at this standard batting area. You'll see that along with their positions and awards and that kind of thing. I will do future videos where I talk about standard pitching stats, and maybe in the future we'll even take a look at the more advanced batting and pitching stats that happen if you scroll down a little bit and you see all of these abbreviations and acronyms and all that fun stuff. But that will be for a future video. Hopefully you found this helpful or interesting, even if you know something about baseball. Some of the little intricacies you may not have realized. So hopefully you came away from this video learning something. That was the whole goal. If so, let me know down in the comments what you learned from this video. I may have missed little extra details and not thrown them in. I didn't put every little detail or every little quirky thing of the rules, but I tried to give you a good overview, especially for people who are brand new to the game or fairly new to the game, so you kind of know what these are and what good numbers are for each of these categories. So, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully that was helpful. And until next time, have a great evening.